Hello, everyone. Welcome to NCST's February Community Impact Briefing. We're going to give folks just a moment to get on. I see that we've still got attendees joining, so we'll get started in about 2 minutes. All right. It looks like the attendees are slowing down, so we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning. Again, welcome to NCST's February Community Impact Briefing. My name is Erin Persons. On behalf of my colleagues at NCST, I want to welcome you today and hope that all are remaining safe from the crazy weather that we've got going on in the world right now. Hope that you're all warm, and for those that haven't had power, I hope that's coming back. Today we have a great lineup for you. We have some community partners from Ohio that are going to share with us what they are doing that is impactful in their community. In addition, we've got our policy briefing from our president, Julia Gordon. As a reminder, we will take questions at several points during our call today after our presenters, and then certainly when Julia is finished speaking. To ask a question, you can either raise your hand, as everyone is currently muted, or you can use the chat or Q&A features in Zoom. With that, I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Chris Garland, who will introduce our guests for today.
Thanks so much, Erin. And as Erin said, I'm Chris Garland. Happy to be here today and absolutely excited to welcome our presenters to today's Community Impact Briefing, all of which I regard as experts in their field and longtime colleagues working here in the Cleveland, Ohio area. All three are doing exciting work in their own right and will be sharing their research and tactical efforts in supporting the communities they serve. Our presenters all participate in a coalition known as VAPAC, the Vacant and Abandoned Properties Action Council, which has been around since 2009, bringing together community development organizations, researchers, and government officials from around the Cleveland region. VAPAC is a vanguard in advocating for good policy, and as a coalition, it creates a forum to share best practices in tackling the hardships presented from vacant properties in low and moderate income communities. Today's presenters contribute to VAPAC's Investor Working Group, which specifically prioritizes researching and addressing unique challenges posed from investor-owned single-family properties. Starting us off today will be Tim Kobie. Tim serves as a business process analyst in the City of Cleveland's Building and Housing Department, and will share findings from his analysis subject matter data from throughout Cuyahoga County. And then Jayme Lucas, who serves as a neighborhood development manager at the Old Brooklyn CDC in Cleveland's Old Brooklyn neighborhood. And Steve Karr, housing coordinator in the inner-ring suburb of South Euclid, Ohio, will discuss how these properties impact the communities they serve, as well as their approaches in addressing these property owners. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tim. Tim, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Chris, and thanks to NCST for having me today. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen to get my presentation up. And everybody should be seeing some slides that should say who is buying 1 through 3 family homes in Cuyahoga County. We're looking over a time period of 2004 to 2019. So we'll go ahead and get right into the data and how we kind of got here. So through the work that I do with the City of Cleveland and the VAPAC Investor Working Group, we just kept having conversations where we kept seeing businesses be the owners of 1 through 3 family homes. Typically, these are problem properties. Either there's a bad landlord-tenant relationship, the property isn't cared for, there's violation notices, there's issues contacting the owner. And I started to think to myself, well, can we actually figure out if businesses are starting to buy more property in Cuyahoga County or not? The concern was just because we work in the space, maybe it's something that we're just seeing, this real small piece of the market segment, and we're missing the big picture. So what I did is I took data for Cuyahoga County, and I went back to 2004 to look at what buying patterns were pre-foreclosure crisis, and then I went all the way up to 2019. I should probably start doing 2020 here soon, but I haven't got that far yet. But what I did to figure out if businesses are buying more properties is I went ahead and coded all the buyers for all these transactions in Cuyahoga County. And you can see there were 7 categories, but the ones that we were most interested in were the differences between individual buyers, people like me, you, versus businesses. So this is, LLCs and other types of business structures. And the reason I'm focusing on that is because in 2019, they accounted for 90% of the buyers in Cuyahoga County. So we'll just look at the baseline here. And this is what was happening in 2004. And you can see that the east side of Cleveland had about 16% of the buyers were businesses. And then the rest of the county was relatively low. All the other submarkets were under 7%. And for folks on the call that aren't real familiar with Cuyahoga County, the east side of Cleveland is predominantly African American. So in 2000, it was almost 80% Black. And then you can see west side of Cleveland, 12%, east inner suburbs, 42%. And then the west inner suburbs and the outer suburbs are predominantly white. So getting back to the buyers there, we had this low number, and in terms of built environment, the east side does tend to have more 2- and 3-family structures. So I was a little concerned that might have been skewing it. I dropped those out, and we still had right about 16% of business buyers. This kind of gave me a baseline what we were seeing before the foreclosure crisis, because we know that kind of threw things way out of whack there for a while. But then let's jump to where we're at right now. And this is, the conversation we've been having at VAPAC led us to believe that there were these high number of buyers that were businesses. And when we actually look at the data, that's what we see. The east side of Cleveland jumped from 16% in 2004 all the way up to almost 40% in 2019. West side of Cleveland also, you see this jump across the board. East inner suburbs jumped up to 30%. West side of Cleveland jumped up 19 percentage points. Investor buyers on the east side of Cleveland and the east inner suburbs now account for approximately 1/3 of all buyers. So you kind of start to think about what this means for home ownership opportunities, especially on the east side of Cleveland and the east inner suburbs, and also issues around neighborhood stability and the ability of these communities to build wealth through home ownership. And so we see the beginning and the end, and now let's kind of look at the pattern over time here. And you can see the initial numbers that I listed before. And then as the foreclosure crisis happens, you can see this spike in business buyers on the east side of Cleveland, and then also in these other submarkets here. The west inner suburbs and the outer suburbs didn't really see a real big uptick from the foreclosure crisis, but the other submarkets did. And then as the foreclosure crisis kind of winds down a little bit, you kind of see a drop off here on the east side. So all these businesses that bought in after the foreclosure crisis, these are the people who are buying in bulk, buying 50 properties, 100 properties at a time. They all exit the market. And then in 2012, which is where this red bar is here, we see that the economy has started to improve and people are starting to look for ways to invest their income. So we see this new growth in business buyers in all submarkets in the city. So east side, east inner suburbs, west side, county as a whole, And then even down here, west inner suburbs and the outer suburbs, we see growth in business buyers. So to provide a little more context, this is what price points businesses versus individuals are buying at. And let's start with the orange. So this is just Cuyahoga County as a whole. You can see these large gaps in between what an individual pays and what a business pays. And this is kind of consistent across 2004, 2012, and 2019. And really all that's telling us is that businesses tend to buy at the low end of the market, which tends to be east side of Cleveland, west side of Cleveland, and the east inner suburbs. One thing that surprised me a little bit was that we see these, for the west inner suburbs and the outer suburbs, there's this gap that starts to grow between what businesses are paying and individuals are paying. And I haven't had a whole lot of time to dig into that and see what's going on there, but that stood out to me. And then one last thing on this slide to really focus on here is that now in 2019, businesses and individuals are buying at about the same price on the east side of Cleveland. So we need to start to think about why that might be happening. Are these individual buyers, are they now just investors themselves and they're not actually buying for home ownership? Are individuals able to get a loan at this low price if they're buying for home ownership? And it just really stood out that we have all these other markets in the county recovered more or less, but the east side of Cleveland has not recovered at this point. So just to dig in a little more on what's happening within the city of Cleveland and the differences between the east side and the west side, you see here pre-foreclosure crisis, individuals are buying up here in the $80,000 to $90,000 range, both on the east side and the west side. And then your businesses are buying down in this range. Well, foreclosure crisis happens, prices bottom out. Then here again, 2012 or so, prices start to recover, but it really recovers. Individual buyers are now at this high price on the west side. Businesses are more or less where they were in 2004. But like I showed on the last slide, individuals and businesses are buying at about the same price on the east side. And it just really hasn't seen the recovery that other submarkets have seen. So investors, businesses buying property isn't necessarily problematic, depending on what they do with it. So I wanted to take a look at the bottom of the market and see what's going on with the properties that we would consider most at risk. So in this case, the way I looked at that was I looked at properties that were boarded up around the time of purchase. And so for the city of Cleveland, a property gets boarded when it's considered open, vacant, and vandalized. Or another way to think of it is it's open to casual entry. So like the front door is kicked in, the first floor windows are open where people can climb in and out of them. These are properties that are going to need, most likely going to need some extensive rehab to bring them back up to the point where you can have someone live in them, whether you're selling it to another person for them to live in it as an owner, or whether you're fixing it up to rent it out. And so what the chart shows us here is the blue line and the red line are on this axis here with the numbers. And from 2010 to 2019, which is what I had good data for, you can see that we have individuals and businesses are both buying this chunk of really distressed property at about the same rate, actually. And it averaged about 126 properties per year. And there wasn't a whole lot of churn there. Most of those were new properties. It wasn't like somebody was selling the same boarded up property 10 times. And then in the purple and the orange, it's the percentage of total purchases made by those two groups. So the percentage of business buyers that were buying a boarded up property and then individuals. And you can see individuals were kind of flat at around 2%, but businesses were as high as 10% in 2010, but then it dropped to about 3.5% in 2019. Initially, I was like, oh, this is a good thing. They're buying less boarded up properties. But what it really means when I looked at the data was that they're just buying that many more properties. So like the total number of board ups is the same. It's just they're buying so many more properties that aren't boarded right now. So like I said, if you're buying a distressed property, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like we want people to buy distressed property. We want them to rehab it, fix it up, rent it out or sell it. But when I looked at permit data for sales, the permit data was actually fairly low in terms of a percentage. So you can see businesses on the west side are pulling permits to work on properties about 12% of the time. And then on the west side for individuals, and then individuals on the east side and businesses on the east side, they're pulling a permit about 9% of the time. And this is all construction permits for us. So that's a building permit and then all the mechanicals. So as an example for a mechanical permit, like if you buy a boarded up property, the electric is turned off, you need to pull an electric permit to turn the electricity back on. You might not pull a building permit to do work, you just pull that electric permit to get the electric turned on. And that's what I'm showing here in the blue, is these are just building permits. So I took out all those mechanical permits to see who was doing more extensive work. And you can see how it kind of drops across the board. And we're still seeing most of our activity happening for businesses on the west side of Cleveland versus the other locations. Equally troubling is that we have individuals on the west side pulling permits almost 6% of the time, and then on the east side, it's down to 4% of the time. So of those board ups that I showed in the previous slide for 2018 and 2019, only 155 of 491 had a permit pulled. And when I looked only at building permits, it was 99 out of 491. So there's not a lot of permit activity happening for those most distressed properties. So if we're not seeing rehab work being done, maybe they're buying more at the top of the market and then renting them out. And the main way that we track rental property in the city of Cleveland is by looking at our rental registry. So I went back 3 years, so 2017, 18, and 19, and looked at the percentage of buyers that pulled, that registered their 1 through 3 family home as a rental after they bought it. And you can see there's good news in that the percentage increased across those 3 years. The bad news is that we're still only at like 28% on the east side and 23% on the west side. Back in 2017, it was even lower, 11% on the west side and 15% on the east side. The city has taken substantial efforts to increase the rental registry and identify all the rentals in the city of Cleveland. So that might have more to do with the increase in the percentage than people actually complying with the rental registration ordinance. So what we're seeing here is we're seeing businesses that are increasing their investment in 1 through 3 family properties, but we're not seeing a lot of investment in terms of permits, and we're not seeing a lot of compliance for rental registration. So that led me to 3 less than ideal scenarios. And again, these are possible scenarios. I can't, say with certainty that this is what's happening. But the 3 possible scenarios from looking at the data was that businesses are speculating or otherwise holding property vacant without improving it through rehab. They're renting out the property without registering it. This obscures it from the rental inspection process. Or businesses are renovating the property, but they're just not pulling the proper permits. So we can't be certain about the quality of work that is occurring. I have more data that I did choose to cut out because I know we're kind of limited on time today. But I'd be happy to take any questions now if we have them, or we can move on to what Jayme and Steve are going to talk about, which kind of puts this. So I took the quantitative approach, and Jayme and Steve are really going to provide us with the qualitative data and the anecdotes that really bring this data to life.
Thank you so much, Tim. As a person with passion for data and analysis, especially when it comes to trends, this is fantastic, and I see this applicability for communities across the country, certainly, and a lot of our buyers. I love the data points that you're utilizing here. One of the questions here: has the vacancy rate changed at all under the holding speculation?
So I think that the vacancy rate has gone down. The main thing that we track at the City of Cleveland is what we call vacant and distressed. So those are properties that are likely going to be needing, that likely need demolition or an extensive rehab. When I first started with the City of Cleveland in 2012, that number was 8,000-9,000, and now we think it's closer to about 4,000.
Got it. I'm not seeing other questions. As a reminder, you can certainly raise your hand. I'd be happy to take you off mute. Or if we're not seeing anything else, and we can certainly come back, and Tim will be available after Jayme and Steve are giving their presentation as well. So we can certainly come back to questions. But thank you, Tim, for the great intro. Oh, I do see that we've got a question here. So Tim, how does code enforcement department capacity relate to the data in your report? Are code enforcers being overmatched?
That's a tough question, but I think my initial response would be no, not necessarily. Some of that just kind of depends on the neighborhood. So I did have some maps that I chose to cut, and maybe I shouldn't have, but there are neighborhoods that do experience more of this activity. And specifically for rentals, though, the rental inspection, the rental inspection unit is working to inspect all rental properties on a regular basis. But as I showed with the one slide, there's not, a lot of the properties aren't on the registry, so those are missed. So then that falls to other inspectors in the area to pick those up.
Excellent. I'm not seeing any other questions right now. I'm going to turn things over to Jayme and Steve for the next qualitative portion of our call. Jayme and Steve, off to you.
Well, thank you. Let's see here. Hopefully you guys can all see this. Thank you for joining this Brown Bag Lunch. My name is Jayme. I'm with Old Brooklyn CDC, which means Community Development Corporation, nonprofit that serves the Old Brooklyn neighborhood of Cleveland. We've been tracking bulk buying for several years. I'm happy to share what we're learning. Like Tim, I was hoping to have shared 2020 data, but I'm just not quite there yet. Since Old Brooklyn is not the center of everyone's universe like mine, I wanted to give you some background. Old Brooklyn is Cleveland's largest neighborhood at 6 square miles, about 35,000 people. We are the quintessential middle neighborhood, still stable, but kind of teetering. We never fully bottomed out, which is a good thing, but it's also bad because we don't have the large redevelopment opportunities that you see with communities that are really thriving in Cleveland. Local examples include Ohio City and Tremont, where they're selling new construction at $500,000 compared to our median sales price of $81,000. So getting to bulk buyers, there are many types of investors, but the most aggressive ones in our neighborhood and many other middle neighborhood communities are real estate management and brokerage firms. These management and brokerage firms work to attract inexperienced, out-of-town investors so they can get all the fees. They collect contracting fees, property management fees, eviction fees, landscaping fees, snow removal fees, and even pest removal fees. They get all the fees. So property management and brokerage firms and their investors target middle neighborhoods like Old Brooklyn. They want communities that are stable enough to attract renters that will pay between $800 and $1,000. have a mix of owner-occupied homes and renters, and have median incomes of at least 40,000, which Old Brooklyn falls into that range. What you're looking at on your screen comes from their website. This is who they are saying that they want to target. Bulk buying destabilizes our communities. They bring the housing prices down. They bring the housing conditions down. They also prevent low and moderate income families from building wealth through home ownership, because they're buying up the homes that low and moderate income families could naturally afford. This map shows areas in Old Brooklyn with 35% or higher bulk buyer rate and a less than 5% sales increase overall for those census block groups. Old Brooklyn has a 22 bulk buying overall percentage and 13% sales increase between 2016-17 and 2018-19. And just so you know, we use 2 years because I drilled down to census block group level, and numbers get really wonky when they get small. This just further shows the impact of bulk buying on our community. Streets with the highest bulk buyer rates have the lowest median sales value. Just as a comparison, in 2019, Old Brooklyn's median sales value was 81,000. And this is compared to streets with the highest activity of having it 30,000 to 50,000. So kind of a shocking difference. I'm sure everyone has one, but ours is Holton Wise. They are a very aggressive property management and brokerage firm. It's difficult to know how many properties are under their umbrella because they don't retain ownership. We basically note and address, have to kind of go down the street, note and address houses with the Holton White sign, look up to see what the properties are, what other properties they own, and that's how we can kind of figure out who's in their umbrella. It's not elegant or perfect, but it's the only way to do it. Last year, we had over, I think it was over 200 properties and 177 owners in their umbrella. So it's not an easy thing to track. This is just a really simple graph showing in 2000, this kind of mirroring Tim Kobie. In 2014-15, we had 16% of our buyers were bulk buyers. And in 2018-19, 22%. And because we are going property by property, we are able to identify, in many cases, individuals who are actually bulk buyers under one of these property management investment schemes. As I mentioned earlier, bulk buying doesn't just impact communities, it directly impacts the ability of low and moderate income families to build wealth through owner occupancy. Low income families can afford homes in the 50 to 80% range, moderate can afford 80 to 100, and these are the exact same homes that are being targeted by these investor buyers. And once the investor buyers get these homes in their umbrella, they will always be rentals. Holton Wise will not show a house unless there's a contract signed. So it will never become owner occupied again. And thank you for your time. I'd like to introduce Stephen Karr. He actually has better news. I'm the bad news person and he's the good news person.
Yes, hello everyone. I'm Steve. I'm the housing coordinator for the City of South Euclid. Jayme, if you could switch to the next slide, please. All right, thank you. So South Euclid, for those of you who aren't from the area, we're an inner ring suburb on the east side of Cleveland. Population, about 21,000. It's been more or less stable with, slight decline over the past decade or so. We're one of the most racially diverse cities in the Cleveland area, and that is one of our strengths, I believe. And while we were hit hard by the foreclosure crisis, we have had a market recovery. Last year, our median sales price had recovered to 120,000, which is about 92% of the high that we saw before the market crashed in 2008. One of the things that we see in South Euclid, like Jayme sees in Old Brooklyn, is out of town property owners, even out of country owners that buy up properties to use strictly for rentals. And the majority of those in the last few years have been from these qualifying organizations where the control of the property is all under one management company who handles just everything from the actual purchase of the property to the rent collection and the placement of tenants. Now we do have some tactics that we use in South Euclid that are different from what they currently use in Cleveland and are different from what they use in other cities in the metro area. Our code enforcement and our requirements are a bit more strict than a lot of the other cities. And I believe that that has had a positive impact with tackling these sorts of buyers that have been problematic in other cities. One of the highlights, and that I think shows that this tactic is paying off for us, is that out of the 9,600 or so rental properties in the city, at the start of this year, we have about a little over 1,700 that are rental properties. Now, why I say that I think our tactics are paying off is because there's been a steep decrease in the number of rental properties in the city. Obviously, after the foreclosure crisis, those numbers skyrocketed. And since 2017, when I started working for the city, there's been a steep but steady decrease of a little under 100 properties going from being rentals to owner occupied in the city each year. And Jayme, if you could flip to the next slide, please. And I'd like to focus on the Holton Wise organization that's been, such a problem to Jayme in Old Brooklyn, and highlight some of the success that we've had, with this group, and just to use them as a case study. Not that they've been the only problematic company operating in the city, nor have they even been the worst, but this just is a case study that shows that we've had success with the tools that we have in our belt. So on the right, you'll see a brief summary of the two city ordinances that we use that I think make us different than a lot of cities in the area, and that have been the key to our success here. The first one in summary states that any property that's being used as a rental that has ownership out of the county is required to have a local agent or a property manager. And then the second one states that we are able to perform the same legal action against that agent or manager as if they were the property manager. Basically, this property manager or agent bears equal responsibility to the property owner in handling this property. On the left here is our case study. One address, 4661 Liberty Road. This was bought in 2017 by an investor from California. Now, we do require properties be registered as rentals in the city annually. In 2018, Holton Wise, who's always been responsible for registering their rentals, sent in the registration for this property without, they mailed it in late, about 4 weeks late, without a late fee. Now we sent that back to them and informed them that the late fee was owed in order for us to process their registration and grant them the certificate of occupancy. We received no response to that. So on March 19th, I filed charges against them in the South Euclid Municipal Court. Now our court requires that any charges for housing matters be filed against an individual and not against a company. So in this case, I filed the charges against John Holton directly, who is one of the owners of Fulton Wise. And the reason I selected him personally instead of the other owner is because it is his signature that appears on every check. And that was my documentation and my reasoning to be able to tie him to this property. Now, we usually offer where they could come into compliance on these charges ahead of time. They declined that, and they instead wanted to go to trial over this. So on August 6th of 2018, there was a bench trial. He decided at that time that he would come into compliance, and all registration fees were paid. He was found guilty still of a minor misdemeanor and was sentenced to a $105 fine plus court costs. Now, shortly after that, in March of 2020, that property was sold to another investor, this time a local investor, and is no longer managed by Fulton Wise. Now, why is that significant? I believe that's significant because, as Jayme said, these properties typically always remain as rental properties under Fulton Wise. There is almost never a sale of the property outside the Fulton Wise umbrella. But this one was. This one, I believe, it's partly because of the center of our tactics. They wanted nothing more to do with it. The other things that we noticed after this trial is they ceased buying properties in South Euclid. There have been no additional properties that have connection to Fulton Wise that have been purchased in South Euclid. They've also stepped up their maintenance of the properties, and at this time we have 0 code violations on any of the remaining Fulton Wise properties. There's currently 4 properties in the city managed by Fulton Wise. 3 are single family homes, and 1 is a condominium unit that's rented out. So based on the positive results that we saw in this case study, I believe that our tactics have paid off. Anecdotally, I've heard that with this ordinance that where we can hold these local agents equally responsible for code violations, for registration penalties, we have dissuaded a lot of buyers from wanting to operate in the city. Whether that's good or bad, I can't directly say. I do believe it is a good thing, and that we are scaring off, the less than savory elements. And as we saw with the total rental numbers, a lot of these organizations have been selling off their rental properties. And that's all I have for my section. Thank you.
Thanks to both of you. Some more really great insight into what's happening. And I would love to see NCST be able to help other communities, duplicate this model of research that you're doing to really make a difference in their neighborhoods. It's fantastic. We did get a question. I'm not sure whether this is going to be for Tim or for you and Steve, Jayme, but if bulk owner business practices are a threat to the residents of racially integrated neighborhoods, what needs that needs to be regulated? What regulations do you think will do that successfully?
Well, I think I think holding the property managers equally responsible to in housing court as the owners will certainly help. And we're also working with the Cuyahoga County Treasurer's Office and it'll probably be challenged in courts, will be interesting, but to not transfer properties to LLCs if that LLC has other tax delinquent properties, which will help integrated communities of color, and I mean, just basically all of our neighborhoods. It will help.
Yeah, that's such a good point. The partnership between municipalities and you as practitioners in the area are so important. And so I absolutely love that. Other questions from folks? And again, I'm happy to unmute you if you'd like to ask a question to any of our panelists, or you can certainly continue to use the Q&A or chat feature. I'm not seeing any right now. We can certainly come back to you. I'm not sure if you're able to stay on the call. Thank you so much for all of this great insight into what's happening in Ohio. It's fantastic. And we really appreciate your time today. And just as a reminder, we will have these presentations available on our website after this call. They will be available tomorrow for you to take a look at. And we'd be happy to have conversations with you or make connections in a place that it makes sense for your organization. With that, I'm going to turn things over to our president, Julia Gordon, for our policy update.
Thanks, Erin. I want to thank all of our panelists today. That was a wonderful presentation. I have about 1 million questions. I'm not going to do that on the call right now, but I think that your stories really need to get out there. I would say the information on the increase in what Tim called business buying it's the story of the inventory crisis that we're facing right now. And it's so important to have this kind of research and analysis and documentation, because the policymakers kind of know the story, but they don't get to see it in black and white all the time. So, that's really exciting to me. I have a number of really interesting policy updates. So for those of you who are thinking about jumping off the call, hold on for 5 or 10 more minutes, because there's some things that are relevant to most of you on this call that I want to talk about today. In particular, I want to talk about 2 pieces of legislation that were introduced into Congress over the past couple of weeks that have been high priorities for NCST, and that I hope are high priorities for everybody on this call. And specifically, those bills are the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act, which we've been talking about for a very long time. As you know, that had been introduced by a bipartisan group in the last Congress. It has now been reintroduced in the Senate by Senators Portman and Cardin. We are hoping that Portman will really consider this something he would very much like as his legacy, given that he has made the announcement that he will be retiring at the end of his term. And we know that this legislation is on President Biden's priority list, and that it has a very high chance of being part of any infrastructure bill that succeeds going forward. Obviously, there's a lot of hurdles to jump in terms of whether anything ever happens in Congress after this first stimulus bill. But this is really, really great news. And the idea that we might at some point have a tax credit for single family homeownership development in low value neighborhoods is, I can't overstate the importance of that for our partners, our local partners. The second piece of legislation that's been introduced is one that we've talked about a little bit in this space, maybe not as much. It was spearheaded by Representative Marcy Kaptur from Ohio. So we have that big Ohio theme going on today, and not surprisingly, given the information we heard from Tim and Steve and Jayme today. This bill would create a subsidy program, not unlike NSP, that would be focused on putting vacant properties back to productive use and to investing in disinvested neighborhoods. The sort of secret sauce of this particular bill has to do with it being a competitive grant program and requiring partnerships among municipalities and nonprofits and land banks and the like to come into this grant program and say, we're working together to make a difference in a particular neighborhood. And I know that so many of you on this call are involved in efforts like that, and that if this program could be created, which would run through HUD and possibly run through an additional intermediary, it would be a really amazing source of support for the important work you're doing in communities. So I'm going to stop there for a minute to see if anybody has any questions on those pieces of legislation, and then I'll move on to a couple of other things.
Any questions from folks? I think you can go ahead and move on, Julia.
Okay, so to move on to one more item that relates to Congress, I think folks know that it is highly likely that the stimulus bill will go through Congress on what they call the reconciliation route, which is a congressional procedure where you can get around the potential of a filibuster or needing 60 senators as opposed to just a majority of senators. Because anything that goes through reconciliation has to be directly budget related, there are certain items that we've been working on that may not be able to be in a bill, such as forbearance protections for private mortgages. But more important is what is likely to be in this bill, and partly because of the help of a lot of you on this call, which is, while it didn't at first, the bill now includes $10 billion for homeowner assistance to prevent foreclosures. It's very broadly defined, including helping with utilities and taxes and insurance, as well as helping with mortgage P&I payments. And that would be distributed out through the state housing finance agencies. Additionally, there is now $100 million in that stimulus bill for housing counseling. Again, something that was not in there at the outset. And so thank you to everyone who's been helping by reaching out or signing letters or doing anything to try to make sure that the stimulus doesn't leave home ownership out. So we're really excited about that and continuing to monitor the situation to make sure we don't lose that support. The other policy news is largely on the sort of regulatory and executive agency side, which is that on Tuesday, FHA, VA, and USDA jointly announced an extension of the foreclosure moratorium through the end of June, as well as an extension of the ability for homeowners to obtain a forbearance through that deadline. They also announced that they were going to allow people whose 12 months of forbearance ends in March, April or May of this year, folks who got a forbearance right in the beginning, because we are not yet out of the crisis, those folks will be allowed up to 6 additional months of forbearance in 3-month increments. There were a few other important changes made as well that may be of less interest here, but I think are really important for the mortgage industry. One is allowing borrowers to go off of forbearance if they feel that they're in a position to resume payments, but to go back on it again if they were to lose their job again and still be eligible for the same post-forbearance options. There used to be kind of a one bite at the apple arrangement for those post-forbearance options, and now that's been eliminated. Additionally, the whole forbearance system was previously treating borrowers who were delinquent pre-CARES Act differently from those who became delinquent afterward. And these government agencies have now essentially erased that distinction for the purposes of what options borrowers have, which helps servicer execution because it eliminates some complexity, and hopefully, it helps borrowers. We know everybody's been impacted by COVID, and whether or not, for families who are having some kind of difficulty pre-COVID, that has generally only intensified during the pandemic. So these are all important changes. I see Deborah asked for the name of Marcy Kaptur's bill, which I specifically didn't say because I wasn't remembering it, but I'm looking it up for you right now. Because I think we have the, I think we've sent it out through some things. It is called the Restoring Communities Left Behind Act, and it was introduced on February 4th. If you look on Kaptur's website, you'll see a press release that, includes some quotes from us at NCST, since we've been working on this along with some other organizations that have been working on this.
Fantastic. Anybody else have some questions for Julia today?
And I know it's a really busy time in terms of things happening in Washington, so I'm certainly happy to try to take any questions outside the four corners of what I just talked about as well. If you're curious about what's going on here inside the Beltway, in sort of only the theoretical sense, since everybody's just in their home office. Not that many people are back in an office. Downtown DC is basically a ghost town right now.
It is exciting though to see how much is happening already. I think certainly. Additional questions for Julia? Comments? I think you covered it all, Julia.
Great.
Certainly feel free to reach out to us at NCST with any questions. If you've got specific legislation that you want to make sure your voice is heard on, please reach out to Julia or our policy team. Chris Siglin would be another person to reach out to on our side. You can certainly reach out to me as well, and I can get you to the right person. We do have a hand raised. Is it Jaquan? I've unmuted you.
This is Johnny, Jaquan's partner. How you doing today?
Good, how are you?
I apologize. I believe I was having different time zones. I was threw off. I apologize. And I don't know if this question is something that you guys address. I'm a real estate developer. Me, Jaquan, and LaTronda, we're real estate developers from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. But one of the things that we represent a nonprofit, and we're real estate developers also. So I've been wondering, how do I sign up with you guys to become a partner from a nonprofit standpoint?
Oh, that's a great question. You can reach out to us at buyer@stabilizationtrust.org, and our team will get you on the right path.
Are you guys accepting new partners at the time?
Right now, we're certainly putting folks on a waiting list. I'm sure you can appreciate that because of moratoriums and other things, there's a lot of volume that just isn't here right now. And because of that, we are putting folks on a waiting list. So certainly getting your name in there for such a time that inventory is back or we have some new opportunities is never a bad thing.
So I want to ask is, when the moratorium is lifted, do you know how long it would be after that you guys will be taking on new partners? And can you repeat that email one more time for me, please?
Sure. The email is buyer@stabilizationtrust.org.
And I can take the second part of that question.
Perfect.
So what we're waiting on is to try to figure out when the inventory is coming back. A lot of that is going to have to do with the timing of the lifting of the moratorium versus the timing of the end to the forbearance regime. Those might not end at exactly the same time. So I do expect that whenever the moratoria end, there will still be some period of time after that where most of our seller partners are not going to have a whole lot of inventory. NCST is working very hard now to source other types of inventory, whether it's, tax foreclosures or anything else that we could be able to offer in an exclusive way to our partners. When we start to see inventory tick back up, that's when we will be, restarting the process of onboarding new partners. We just can't say right now when that might be. That said, I would really encourage you guys to stay in touch with us in other ways. I hope all of our partners, even as there's not a whole lot of inventory flowing through the system now, keep abreast of the policy efforts we're doing, the middle neighborhoods work we're doing, the homeownership alliance that we've launched. There's lots of different things to stay up on and be in a conversation about. There's attending these monthly webinars. There are other webinars we offer that you can, sign up through our website on other things. And, we're here trying to, trying to be a source of centralized information, and happy to take other questions about the work you're doing. Just let us know. And even for where we can't onboard new buyers, we may be able to tell you about other partners in the area where you might want to be working with.
Okay, who should I reach out for that?
Just reach out through that buyer address, because that goes to more than one person at our organization.
All right, thank you. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right. Lots of information to share today. I want to thank again our presenters, Tim and Jayme and Steve from Ohio, for sharing about the work and the data and trends that they are looking at on a regular basis. Thank you, Julia, for a comprehensive policy update. We look forward to talking with you again on March 17th for our next community impact briefing. Julia, any closing comments?
No, other than, I know that it's a really rough time for everybody now, both in terms of business and kind of emotionally for all of us, slogging through a tough winter after a year of lockdown. And, there is a light at the end of this tunnel. I'm pretty sure it's not the oncoming train. It may, be a few months off, but we're really hopeful that, we'll start to see things pick up in terms of what we're doing. We're really hopeful on these potential legislative paths to help you all with the work that you're doing. And, please stay in touch with us. We're all stronger together. And we appreciate you joining us today.
Wonderful. Goodbye, all.